The late afternoon sun cast long, golden shadows across the sprawling ranch, turning the dust rising from the dirt paths into sparkling, floating particles. Clara's boots scuffed against the earth as she hurried through the pasture, her thoughts tangled between exhaustion and frustration. She had been assigned to check the northern fences today, a task that seemed simple enough at first, but the uneven terrain and scattered rocks made each step precarious. She loved the ranch, the freedom, the smell of hay, the way the wind whispered through the tall grasses, but the work was unforgiving. And now, after weeks of labor, she felt the weight of fatigue pressing on her shoulders, mingling with an unease she couldn't quite place. Clara had only just begun to find her footing in this rugged new life. Coming from the city, she had imagined a pastoral idyll, soft mornings with sunlight streaming through windows, a gentle rhythm of work and rest. Reality was far harsher. Every day demanded something of her: strength, patience, and a willingness to face exhaustion without complaint. But perhaps the most challenging aspect wasn't the physical labor, it was Jace. Jace, the rancher, was as much a force of nature as the land itself. Stories about him traveled like wildfire through the small town nearby, tales of his unwavering discipline, his sometimes frightening temper, and the way he could command a herd of cattle as if he were bending them to his will. Clara had seen it firsthand, and yet, seeing him in motion, his powerful arms hauling bales of hay, his gaze sharp as he scanned the horizon, left her unsettled in ways she didn't fully understand. There was something magnetic about him, an unspoken authority that made her pulse quicken and her thoughts scatter. Today, that magnetism drew her eyes unwillingly, and then it drew him. A sudden slip on a hidden rock caused her ankle to twist sharply, and pain shot through her leg, almost knocking her off balance. She gasped, clutching at a fence post for support, but before she could fall completely, a strong arm encircled her waist, steadying her with a firm but gentle grip. Jace had appeared from seemingly nowhere, his presence commanding yet protective. "Careful," he said, his voice low and steady, carrying the kind of calm authority that made her instinctively obey. Clara could feel the heat of his body near hers, the roughness of his work-worn shirt brushing against her skin, and it took all her willpower not to recoil. "You shouldn't be running across uneven ground alone," he continued, his eyes scanning her ankle as if trying to assess the damage without a word. Clara swallowed hard, trying to mask the sharp sting of embarrassment along with the throbbing pain. I'm fine," she managed, though the pain radiating through her ankle contradicted her words. The truth was, she wasn't fine at all. But admitting that would mean relinquishing a shred of control, and Clara had spent too long holding on to independence to give it up now, even if it meant limping slightly. Jace didn't argue. Instead, he guided her gently toward the barn, moving with surprising grace for someone so broad and powerful. The barn doors loomed ahead, open to the late sunlight streaming in, illuminating dust motes that danced in the warm air. He helped her onto a bench, supporting her weight as she tried to shift awkwardly, but she soon realized it was impossible without his assistance. She felt her cheeks flush, a mixture of pain, vulnerability, and something else she didn't want to acknowledge. "Let me see your ankle," he said softly. Clara hesitated, a nervous lump forming in her throat. The idea of him touching her made her pulse spike, and in a whisper, she muttered, "Don't make me undress, please." The words startled her, and she immediately regretted them, fearing they might provoke laughter or irritation. But Jace's expression did not change in the ways she had imagined. Instead of mocking her, his eyes softened. There was no judgment, only concern, the kind that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't expected. "Clara," he said carefully, "I'm not going to hurt you. I just need to make sure it isn't broken." His hands, though large and strong, moved with a deliberate gentleness as he carefully unwrapped her sock and lifted her foot onto his lap. The contrast between the roughness of his hands and the care with which he tended to her injury made her heart race. She wanted to pull away, but something in his calm, measured attention kept her rooted in place. As he examined her ankle, she felt a mix of emotions, fear, curiosity, and a reluctant sense of trust. His touch was firm enough to be practical but careful enough to convey reassurance. He murmured observations under his breath, noting swelling, tenderness, and bruising, his focus unwavering. For a moment, she allowed herself to simply breathe, letting go of the tense posture she had maintained since arriving at the ranch. Here, in the quiet barn filled with the scent of hay and the distant lowing of cattle, she felt strangely safe. Hours seemed to stretch as they sat together, a silence punctuated only by his careful movements and the occasional soft murmur. Jace did not attempt to impose his presence in any way beyond what was necessary. He spoke in quiet tones, sharing insights about the ranch, how he had learned to read the sky for storms, how he remembered each of his animals by sight and sound, and how much patience it took to care for a place that demanded everything from those who worked it. Clara found herself listening intently, realizing that the man before her was far more complex than she had assumed. He was capable of both strict authority and profound gentleness, a duality that fascinated her. By the time he finished cleaning and bandaging her ankle, Clara was physically exhausted and emotionally overwhelmed. Her trust in him had grown in those few hours, not because of grand gestures or declarations, but because of the steady, unassuming care he had offered. She realized, with a quiet shock, that her perception of him, of herself, even, had shifted. The walls she had built around her heart, designed to protect her from disappointment or harm, now felt less impenetrable. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, Clara allowed herself a small, tentative sense of relief. Here, in this barn, with the sunlight fading and the air cool around her, she could acknowledge that Jace was not just a figure of fear or desire, but someone she could trust. It was a delicate, fragile trust, one that had been earned in small, careful moments of attention and gentleness, but it was trust nonetheless. And as she looked up at him, noticing the tension in his own jaw soften slightly as he assessed her ankle, she understood that the events of this afternoon were more than an accident or a moment of weakness. They were the beginning of something profound, a connection built not on convenience or attraction alone, but on care, vulnerability, and the willingness to see and be seen in ways that scared her. Clara knew that the days ahead would challenge her in ways she could not yet imagine, but in this moment, she felt the first flicker of courage. It was a quiet revelation. Life on the ranch was demanding, unpredictable, and sometimes frightening, but it was also real, raw, and capable of showing her who she truly was. And for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine that she might face those challenges not alone, but alongside someone who understood strength as well as tenderness, and who had, in the span of a single afternoon, earned her cautious but undeniable trust. The morning after the barn incident lingered in Clara's mind like a vivid dream she couldn't shake. The soft ache in her ankle reminded her of Jace's careful hands, and for some reason, she found herself replaying the way he had looked at her, not with desire, but with a kind of focused, unwavering concern. She hadn't realized how much she needed someone to see her in that way, to recognize both her vulnerability and her strength, without judgment. The memory made her heart race even as she tried to push it aside. The ranch demanded focus, and she had work to do, yet every glance toward the barn or the fields reminded her that Jace's presence was now an indelible part of her days. The days passed, and the connection between them deepened, not through overt gestures, but through quiet, shared moments. He would arrive just as she began her tasks, offering guidance with an almost imperceptible warmth that made her feel noticed and supported. Sometimes it was a simple correction of her posture while lifting hay bales, or a gentle word about how to coax the cattle into line without startling them. Clara began to see him in a different light, not as an intimidating figure, but as someone shaped by hardship and duty, capable of both strength and compassion. The barn incident had cracked the shell she had built around her heart, and every day, she found herself letting him in just a little more. One evening, as the sun began its slow descent, clouds gathered on the horizon, signaling an approaching storm. The air carried a weight that made the ranch feel smaller, confined, yet alive with tension. Clara had been checking on the northern horses when the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. Panic prickled through her chest. Horses could spook in storms, and a runaway animal could mean disaster. She moved quickly, trying to secure the barn doors and coax the horses into safety, but the wind tugged at her clothes and whipped her hair into her face. She stumbled across the slippery ground, her ankle still tender, and realized too late that she had ventured too far. A shadow appeared beside her before she could even call out. Jace's presence was immediate, commanding, and somehow comforting. In one swift motion, he lifted her into his arms, the sudden weightlessness forcing her to gasp. "Hold on," he said, his voice steady over the roar of the storm. Clara's heart pounded, not just from fear of slipping into the mud, but from the intensity of being held by someone so close, so strong, so undeniably present. The world around them blurred, the wind, the rain, the shouts of unsettled animals, leaving only the two of them in sharp focus. He carried her through the storm, his steps purposeful and sure, and Clara felt a strange mixture of relief and vulnerability. Her mind screamed at her to pull away, to assert control, but her body refused. It was as if the storm outside mirrored the tumult inside her, and for the first time, she allowed herself to surrender to both. Every detail registered. The rough texture of his shirt against her skin, the warmth radiating from his body, the scent of leather and earth that clung to him. And yet, in that chaos, there was calm, an unspoken promise that he would protect her, that she could trust him entirely in this moment. By the time they reached the barn, both were drenched, mud streaking their clothes, hair plastered to their faces. Jace set her down gently, draping a thick blanket over her shoulders without a word. The simple act, so unassuming, made Clara's chest tighten with emotion. She was aware of him in a way that went far beyond attraction. She felt the weight of his attention, the care he invested, and the patience that allowed her to feel safe without being rushed. The storm pounded the roof, each gust of wind rattling the barn's timbers, but inside, they were cocooned in a fragile, shared intimacy. Jace moved about the space, securing loose hay bales and checking the horses, but never leaving her side. He spoke little, yet every word was deliberate, grounding her, reminding her that she wasn't alone. "I've weathered many storms," he said at one point, leaning against the post beside her, "but it's easier when you have someone to watch your back." Clara's lips parted, wanting to respond, but the words stuck in her throat. The depth of his vulnerability surprised her. This man, who seemed invincible, was human in ways she hadn't expected. Hours passed as the storm raged, and with each passing moment, Clara felt layers of fear and hesitation peeling away. She began to see the life she had imagined differently, not the quiet, controlled existence of the city, but something wilder, rawer, and yet full of connection. She realized that love, trust, and courage weren't about grand gestures, they were about showing up, remaining steady when the world shook, and treating others with care even when it was inconvenient or dangerous. At one point, Jace noticed her shivering and moved closer, not with force, but with deliberate attention, adjusting the blanket so it wrapped more securely around her. She met his gaze and saw there the same unwavering focus, the same quiet strength she had witnessed when he had tended her ankle. For the first time, she understood that the storm outside was not the only thing they were surviving, there was also the storm within them, the fear of surrendering to trust and emotion. And slowly, in that moment, Clara let herself believe that it was possible to survive both. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean. Sunlight glimmered on the wet fields, and the earthy scent of rain filled the air. Clara stood at the barn doors, her soaked hair clinging to her face, watching the light shift across the pasture. Jace approached, his clothes damp, boots muddy, yet his expression calm, steady, and reassuring. He offered his hand, a simple gesture, yet it carried the weight of all they had endured together. I'm ready," Clara whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Ready for what comes next." The words surprised her. She had not expected to speak them aloud, but saying them felt like a release, a declaration of willingness to face uncertainty with someone she could trust. Jace's smile was slow, thoughtful, and profoundly warm. "Then we face it together," he said. And in that promise, Clara felt a new kind of strength blooming, a courage rooted not in solitary effort, but in shared trust and mutual respect. The ranch, the storms, and the challenges had shaped them both, carving away fear and doubt, leaving only the essential truth, that vulnerability and strength could coexist, and that true connection required risk. As they walked back across the glistening fields, the barn behind them and the sun breaking through clouds ahead, Clara realized that she had discovered more than resilience. She had discovered hope, trust, and the unexpected, transformative power of someone who could see her fully, and still choose to stand beside her. And with each step, the past fears that had constrained her seemed smaller, insignificant against the possibility of a future where courage, care, and love could finally take root.